Okay, so today I want to do a final talk in this series about the other lines of the hand. So we were looking yesterday at the three main lines. That's the major earth line, the major air line, and the major water line. But there are a lot of other lines that can be found in the hand. And this is a topic that starts where things start getting complicated because whilst nearly all people will have the first three main lines of the hand, not everybody has the other lines that can be found in the hand. I'm just going to show you something which will illustrate that quite clearly. So you find some hands that literally have just the three main lines, and possibly one, two other things on the hand too. But as you can see from this particular handprint, the three main lines are very clearly located. There's the major earth line going around the ball of the thumb. There's major air line starting from the same point going across the hand, and then the major water line going from underneath the little finger and up towards the water finger. So you've got those three main lines there and almost nothing else. In fact, this guy's got a minor earth line, which is the line that runs up the center of the palm here. That's the line. That's the fourth most common line to be found on the hand. It's not always present, but likely to be present. And I can easily identify it as the secondary earth line by virtue of the fact that it points towards the earth finger. So this is a line of balance. It sits in the middle of the palm, running from the bottom of the palm to the top of the palm. And is a very good descriptor of the boundaries between people and how people create boundaries within their life. It's like a threshold line, if you like, between the conscious half of the hand and the unconscious half of the hand. So that's the fourth most commonly found line. In total, there are, I'll just change that and go back to another image. In total, we can consider that there are, if you like, 7 main lines that can be found in the hand. In addition to the 3 major lines and the minor earth line, you also find secondary lines like a secondary water line, a secondary air line, and a secondary earth and a secondary fire line. So these lines are all kind of inner reflections of the major lines themselves. The interesting thing with all of these lines as well is they are all located on the unconscious half of the hand, which tells us something about their provenance and significance, and that the presence of these lines shows a kind of an awakening of an internal sense of themselves and an internal consciousness orientation. It's not necessary to have these lines. People can function perfectly well without them, although it's almost axiomatic to say people can't function well without the 3 primary lines. But I think if we're going to consider the main lines of the hand, we need to consider that there are 7 main lines. And when I say main lines, I don't really mean them in terms of importance, just meaning in terms of their frequency of occurrence. And how do you know which line's which? Well, the minor earth line goes to the earth finger, the minor fire line goes to the fire finger, the minor air line goes to the air finger, and the upper minor water line goes towards the water finger. So the labeling is really quite easy to understand because of the location of the line describes that. But the appellation of the elements, the ascription of the elements to the line of the hand also tells us something about their functioning and their significance. So to start with the minor earth line, the minor earth line basically reflects something that provides a stabilizing influence, because we know that the earth element is to do with stability, whereas where the major earth line is to do with stability in the external world, to do with family, security, the country that you live in, how grounded you are in the material world, which will be money, housing, and the way that you live. The minor earth line is how grounded you are internally. So it's like a psychological reflection or a psychological version of that grounding to be found internally rather than in the external material manifest world. Now, not all hands are as clear and as simple as this. Here's a good contrast to a hand that has an incredible fine mesh of lines all over the hand. This is the kind of hand that can be very, very difficult to assess because the multiplicities of lines means that this person's consciousness is incredibly complicated. And I think that's a very good rule to start with if you're looking at the hand. Look for the general clarity of the hand. The fewer the lines, the more simple the person wants their life to be, the less cluttered, the less complicated they are. Someone who prefers to be in quiet environments, living in the countryside, working in nature, having a calm and even disposition towards life. Whereas someone with a multitude of lines has got someone with a very, very busy mind that's constantly distracted or worried or anxious or fearful, or very dispersed or very busy. Just someone who likes to be doing things. They're juggling 15,000 things all at the same time. So a busy hand or a full hand is a sign of a busy consciousness, or a stressful consciousness or a stressful life. When it comes to looking at the individual lines, it becomes very, very difficult to see which lines is which. But what's important about that is to not get over fixated about that, because this person's life is so busy and messy, it's actually hard for them to differentiate themselves, all the different functions associated with the different line formations. So you can see the major water line there. You can see that her major air line is in two parts here, so she's got a dual major air line. And the major earth line is very weak and faint and comes around here and is islanded. Arguably, that's the minor earth line. There it is, going up towards the earth finger, so you know that. And here's a minor fire line going up towards the fire finger. And then you've got these upper minor water lines coming along here, going towards the water finger. So she's got a lot of the minor lines in her hand. But whether they can function in her life is a moot point, because the minor lines only really work well when there is a clarity in the hand, when there's a clarity to the line. And you can see this minor air line here in this hand is very strong and very clear. This line formation is, when it's like this, is commonly seen in people who have good control over their autonomic nervous systems, people who do a lot of yoga or meditation or breath work, or free diving, like its ability to dive underwater holding your breath. Whereas in this hand, you've got a lot of agitation in that line. It's malformed in lots of different kinds of ways. There's a big island down here. So you would expect to see ill effects of this line in terms of health problems, stress, probably pneumatic or pleural problems with her lungs, given the big island there. Yeah, so this is a very stressed person. So don't worry too much if you can't always identify the minor lines in the hand. Try and identify the major lines, and if you can, and pick out the kind of key features that you can see in the hand. But just remember, the lines are not the most important part of the hand. The hand shape, skin texture, and particularly the fingerprint patterns are the hand features that will tell you about the personality and tell you about what the person does with their life. Their lines show people's experiences. What I mean by that is also how people experience themselves. So we can see the water element or the air element in the fingers and the fingerprints, but how the person experiences the water element or the air element will be shown in the line, in the corresponding lines, in the lines corresponding to that element. All right, so I'm going to show you some handprint examples of the minor line formation, so you can get an idea of where they are, and you've got an array of examples so that you can start looking for them in hands. So let's go through them. There's the major earth line. This one's branching right out across here. Here's the major air line coming through the center of the hand like that. Here is the major water line going up towards the index finger in this particular case. Notice how it's ending there. So I'm just going to illustrate a few different lines. So there you have the minor earth line, secondary earth line coming up from inside the earth, major earth line going up towards the earth finger. Here you have a strong form of the secondary fire line going up towards the fire finger. Here you have a fragmented form of the secondary air line going up towards the air finger. And in terms of subsidiary line formations that are of note on this hand, you've got a loyalty line here and some protocol lines across the center of the palm here. But in terms of the secondary lines, you've got a very strong minor earth line and a strong minor fire line. All right. This is the one that we've already been looking at, so nothing further to add to that, except to say this guy's got a major fire line. You can see this short line here, that's a very well formed major fire line. That's about as long as the major fire line gets. So it's not a loyalty line. You can see that's down here. It's a line that exists between the major airline and a loyalty line around the middle of that. It's usually about 2 centimeters long if it's a long one, 1 centimeter long if it's a normal length one. Not everybody has this, so it's definitely a subsidiary line, not one of the primary lines nor one of the secondary lines. Okay, we're going around in circles, I think. Okay, this handprint here also has a strong, as this one's got a very strong major fire line looking over there on that part of the hand, and a very strong secondary fire line going up towards the ring finger, a strong secondary air line, and here's the secondary earth line running up the center of the palm like that. All right, so this is an interesting and complicated hand with a lot of different kind of hand formations on it. Ignore the printing of that. That's clearly a fold in the palm where it hasn't opened out properly, so that doesn't mean that line's really, really thick. You can see here the major waterline is a very clearly well-formed line running towards the index finger. We have a strong minor airline going across here, so major airline coming across here, and then the earth line curling around the palm, very weak at the bottom, frayed at the bottom, and turning out towards that part of the hand here. What you can also see in the hand here is what we call a lower minor waterline, very strong straight line in the lower water area, a strong secondary airline running up towards the air finger, and a somewhat fragmented but nonetheless present secondary earth line going up to the middle finger. For those of you who are fans of Johnny, there you go, lovely passion line going right there, coming down from between the space between the ring finger and the little finger. The passion line is actually a form of upper minor waterline, and it's interesting in the old texts. If you read people like Jaquin, they associated upper minor waterlines, or the girdle of Venus as it's often called, with sexual debauchery and promiscuity. Little did they know that they were actually looking at something that's called a passion line, which, as many of you may know, was actually discovered by Johnny Fincham in the mid-1990s, I believe. He presented it at one of our advanced seminars in the 90s to do with emotionality and sexuality as seen in the hand. There's actually a really interesting book by a guy called Nathaniel Altman called Sexual Palmistry, which is not a particularly good book, but it has an incredible array of handprint examples within it of all sorts of people with different kind of sexual predilections and preferences. And so many of those handprints have the passion line, and yet he doesn't notice it, he doesn't talk about it, he doesn't reference it. He can't even see the presence of that line. And it is real testimony to Johnny Fincham's hand-reading, researching abilities that he pioneered the understanding of that line and discovered its significance vis-a-vis sexual fantasy, voyeuristic orientation, and therefore a kind of what people might call promiscuity, but a kind of, we could also argue is a liberated sexual attitude, the bringing down of fantasy into one's emotional life through the form of sexual play. So clearly well marked in this hand. We can see another protocol line here, going across between the water and air lines here. Yep, so there's kind of nice array of minor lines. So there's a little bit of a minor fire line going up towards the fire finger here. I wouldn't really count that one. It's too fragmentary. There's a kind of interest in that area of life, but nothing. It's not coherent. It's only when the line is really strongly present do you find it denoting someone with a strong spiritual orientation towards life. This is more the hand of a businesswoman with great ideas and a strong sex drive, and someone who's good at dancing, looking at that waterline, than someone who's particularly spiritually orientated. All right, so what do we got here? So here's a handprint with lots of upper minor waterline formations. We all know where the major waterline is now. It starts underneath the little finger, goes towards the index finger. Any horizontal lines above that or curved lines above the major waterline is an upper minor waterline. It's a secondary waterline. It's in the upper area of the hand as opposed to the lower area of the hand, and it's ruled by the element water. So that's why the passion line is really a variation on the upper minor waterline. You can see these ones are kind of classically sort of girdles of Venus. They loop around underneath the fingers like that. And there's one here and there's another one here. So this is quite a complicated hand. This is the hand of a musician. You often get these kind of duplications in the waterline in this kind of way in people who are interested in mathematics and who are musicians or who play things like war games or computer gaming in general, Dungeons and Dragons back in the old days before the computers. They have a strong, vivid imagination. And you find this also in the hands of people into photography and cinematography, people who've got a good storytelling ability or a strong visualization ability. With respect to the passion line, it's just by being angular and being straight, that's a fire quality. So that brings that imagination and visualization ability into a sexual format because of the straightness of the line. It shows it's something that wants to be acted out, particularly where it makes contact with the major waterline. I've just noticed this one in her case also makes contact with the minor earth line. So there's a kind of interplay between her sexual fantasy and her work life in some kind of way. So that would be an interesting avenue to pursue in this particular hand reading. But yeah, sometimes you get these variations in the upper minor waterline that are quite extensive. But they basically show someone with a strong imagination and possibly a dualized emotional life. It's not a great sign to have these formations like that. There's a kind of, they have an ability to dissociate, to create a kind of, have a life that goes on in their head separate from the emotional interaction with the people around them. And these people can be really difficult to have emotional relationships with because there's a kind of hidden quality to their emotional life. Their major waterline, which is indicative of their emotional life, is buried under these layers of persona, image, and presentation tools. I mean, this guy's actually got 3 secondary waterlines up here. I know a reduplication here, persona line there, secondary persona line there, and then the major waterline there. This would be a person who's complicated emotionally and difficult to get to know. They may not be what they seem, but they present themselves to be. This kind of doubling a waterline is also seen in the hands of people like Jimmy Savile. So if you go to my website, you'll find a very interesting article about Jimmy Savile, Michael Aspel, cult leaders who've been accused of sexual abuse, who've all got this kind of doubling of the waterline going on. When you see that, you know that there's something else going on than what they are presenting to the world. All right, so in this hand, what have we got here? Well, you should be able to identify these for yourself now. Here's the earth line. This one's a broken earth line, but this earth line is also functioning as a secondary earth line. So here's the secondary earth line here. Here's another part of the secondary earth line there. So there's a duplication in the major earth line. There's a duplication in the secondary earth line. Here's also is a very strong minor phi line, secondary phi line, and also a very strong secondary air line. Notice when you're looking at the airline, particularly look at the connection between the airline, the secondary airline, and the major airline. See how these interface like that. Secondary airlines are very commonly seen in the hands of businessmen, people who are problem solvers, idea generators. So that's, and how that interfaces with the primary airline is of interest, because the major airline shows something about how we think in a rational, logical kind of sense. What's interesting when you get to looking at the hand here, this is obviously a reduplicated ending to the major waterline, but it's a very extended one. And when it becomes extended like that, that becomes like functions like a secondary waterline or upper minor waterline. We call this a persona line. When someone's got a secondary line like that, there's someone who presents themselves in a very particular kind of way, commonly seen in actors, television presenters, people who have a public face that's different from who they are internally. These are always people who are a bit more difficult to get to know. They've got a facade behind which they are they're masking themselves. So you need to work a little harder to get to know them well. So this is a good example of actually a major waterline breaking off, becoming like an upper minor waterline. So, but that's part of the major waterline actually. All right, so secondary phi line, minor phi line, secondary airline, the minor airline, minor earth line, and here another form of the upper minor waterline. And lastly, I wanted to show you the hands of Carl Jung. I mean, Jung's an interesting person in all sorts of different reasons. But again, what we've got here is a hand with a lot of complexity within the hand. Partly that's to do with age. In this particular case, the Jung was 75 years old, 75 yada over there, written here, which shows he was 75 when this handprint was taken, which means he was, obviously getting on. And a lot of the lineal effects that we see in the hands here are a product of aging. Whereas the handprint we saw at the beginning with a lot of lines, actually was a 21 or 22-year-old woman who had many lines all over her hand. So again, another indication that the lines are not to do with moving the hand or getting old. So the complexities of the lines in this hand are, again, too much to work out of what the significance or meaning is of every single individual line. And I think that's an important point that I want to get across to you. Not every single line has a meaning. Not every single line has a significance. Some are just lines associated with aging. Some are lines associated with stress or worry. Some are indications of biological, physiological degeneration. I would expect here that he's at this age, he's getting urinary tract infections and kidney problems, maybe weakened adrenal glands by virtue of the lineation that's going on in this part of his hand. So the task when you've got a complicated hand like this is to try and identify the main lines of the hand and see if you can see where they are and work with those. So don't look for shapes and patterns. Don't look for elephants and conches. Don't look for crosses and stars. Look for the main lines. Here's the major earth line running around the palm. Here's the secondary earth line going up the hand towards the middle finger. Here is the major air line coming across the palm and dropping deep into the subconscious. Here is the minor airline, the secondary airline running up here. Here is the major waterline running up right between the fingers up there. And we've got some other secondary waterlines or upper minor waterlines going on here. That's the major phi line right there. And that's the secondary phi line going up towards the ring finger. So you can see all the primary lines, the 7 main lines, quite clearly in this hand. And in addition to that, you can see a few others. This guy is my favorite example for the protocol line. He's actually got 1, 2, 3 protocol lines running across the hand, arguably even 4, if you want to count that one. But aside from that, most of the other lineal formations on this hand are not to be considered to be significant, and you will absolutely lose yourself in the morass of detail if you try and understand what they all mean and try and work out what they mean and investigate them all in that kind of way. So really, don't be concerned with that all that detail of the hand, because it's too much and it's too complicated. What's important to look at is to identify the main lines of the hand. And in total, there are 7. The 3 major lines, the primary, I like to call these the 3 primary lines because they occur in every hand: the major earth, the major air, and the major water lines. And then add to that the secondary lines: secondary earth, secondary water, secondary fire, and secondary air lines, which are also commonly seen. And then all the other lines, and there are patterns in the lines that we can see, like the major fire line. There are line formations that do occur that actually do have some significance. But it's these 7 main lines that we need to identify first. And if you can work through those and see those with clarity and understand those, you'll go a long way to understanding the significance of the lines on the hand. So don't get too caught up with the lines. It's very easy to dive into a handprint and start going, oh, what does that mean? Look at that over there. And as I said, they have a very fascinating quality, the lines of the hand. But they need to be considered in the context of the hand shape as a whole, the skin texture, the fingerprint patterns, and any palmar dermatoglyphics. That's the kind of setting in which the significance of all the lines take place. And you find a particular line formation in one hand, and it means something else because it's on an earth hand than it does if it's on a water hand. So you need to orientate yourself to get the geography of the hand correct first, so that you're actually seeing the kind of world the person lives in. And it's the same when dealing with humanity. If you know where a person comes from, which part of the world they come from a tropical zone, they've got houses built in a certain kind of way, they wear certain kind of clothes, they eat outdoors a lot. Whereas if you're someone from a northern hemisphere living in a big urban conurbation like New York, where it's cold and it rains in winter, people eat differently, dress differently, and lived and build different kind of housing. So that's the context in which their life occurs. Lots of human activity is the same in the different places, but we do it slightly differently because we're in a different geographical environment. And that's the trick, the skills that's required in hand reading to become a good hand reader, is to contextualize what you see in the hand within the context of the person's life as a whole. So you need, first of all, to work out what those overall parameters are. Hand shape, skin texture, fingerprints, palmar dermatoglyphics. Those are the 4 primary things that you must need to assess on the hand. Those 4 alone will tell you about their psychology, their personality, and will also, most of the time, you better work out what jobs they do just from those 4 things alone. Everything else then becomes supplementary and adds to that, strengthens or reinforces that, or modifies that slightly. It kind of fine-tunes your basic assessment. So don't go into the lines at first. Lines are complicated. It's often hard to actually even identify what the lines are, let alone what they may signify in the context of that person's life. And when I've tried to give you some examples so you can easily identify the different primary and secondary lines in the hand, but it takes a lot of practice to work that out. And I'm constantly getting questions from people, oh, what's this line here? What does that mean? Or what's that line? I can't even work out what's going on here. So if that's for you too, you can send me a photograph of your hand and I'll identify the lines for you so you can get some clarity about what they are. Because like with any assessment, diagnosis is the first step. If you don't get the assessment right, it's going to be impossible to get the interpretation right. So I hope you found that useful summary overview of the lines of the hand. This concludes the series of talks I'm doing on introduction to the hand. What I'm planning to do later in the year is to run a full course. Each of the talks that I've given in this series of 15 to 30-minute video presentations. Each of these talks are usually a 3 to 5 hour discussion. So when I'm teaching this material, it's about 36 hours of teaching material plus another 12 or 13 hours of print reading material. It's about 50 to 60 hours of tuition that I've just unpacked and summarized in these 8 or 9 videos. But I hope that's given you a taster of the kind of approach that I take to hand reading. And if you're interested in learning more about this, put a comment below, send me an email, like and subscribe, and I'll see you with the next video soon. Okay, thanks for watching.